It's been an incredible journey for me through television and radio. It is dwarfed by the guests that we're going to be able to listen to today and to ask questions of a little bit later on. She is simply the finest presenter I have ever seen and had the honor to work with. Will you please put your hands together and welcome Miss Angela Rippon, CBE.
Hi, David.
Come and sit down.
Thank you.
Right.
Yes.
I was going to say, where do we start? Shall we start at the very beginning?
Yeah, sure.
We're not actually that far from... Were you born in Plymouth?
Yes, I was, down the road, in Stonehouse. My father was a Royal Marine, so he was in that lovely barracks at Stonehouse, down in Durnford Street.
Yep.
That was where I was born, in 1944.
1944?
1944, so I still have quite strong memories of my father, because my mum worked all her life. I mean, you know, she was sort of someone that was the... if you like, it didn't occur to me that a woman didn't leave school and go out to work. It never occurred to me that that isn't what I was going to do, because that was what my mum had done all her life. But my dad was a Royal Marine, and on Saturdays, when Mummy was still working, my dad and I used to walk around Plymouth, and I'm sure there will be some people in the audience who will remember what it was like to walk around Plymouth. I probably would have been about 5 or 6, so we're talking 1949, 1950, when there were still lots of bomb sites. I mean, my playground down... just off Union Street we lived, Union Street, which had quite a reputation in those days, which I wasn't aware of as a little girl, but I did like the pretty ladies with the ankles, straps around their ankles that looked very sweet with their mini skirts in the 1940s. Didn't quite realise what they did for a living at the time, of course. So I was brought up just off Durnford Street, and we used to walk into Plymouth, my dad and I, and there were bomb sites everywhere. My playground were the bomb sites in the city, because it had been so desperately bombed during the Blitz of the Second World War.
Yeah.
And I remember walking into St Andrew's Church when it didn't have a roof on it, when it was still as it had been left at the end of the Second World War. So I have all of those memories of what Plymouth was like in those days. This was my home. This is where I was, and this, not this building, but the one next door, is the school that I went to, public. I went to the grammar school next door when it was a grammar school. Yeah, that was where I went to school.
And did you ever move from Devon, or was this always your heart? I know you still live here.
No, Devon was home. My father came out of the Royal Marines. My mother did not particularly want to travel away too much. She was Scottish, in fact. My grandfather was a Devonian who had moved to Scotland, married my grandmother, who came from Killiecrankie, which I didn't believe existed. I thought Granny had made up the name. And I was in Scotland a couple of weeks ago, and I went there for the very first time. And I expected to find... It's very famous for the Soldiers' Leap during the rebellion that they had up there, the Jacobite rebellion, when a British redcoat was running for his life in this particular part of Scotland, in the foothills of the Cairngorms, and running for his life with the Scottish savages behind him. And he leapt 18 feet, apparently. I mean, he would have won us a gold medal in the Olympics if we'd had it then. He leapt some 18 feet across the river, which was really very, very treacherous, and saved his life. And there is a place there on what is now Scottish National Trust land called Soldiers' Leap. And that was Killiecrankie, and I expected there to be a village there. And there are 8 houses, 4 on each side of the road, and then you're out of it, and that's it.
Wow.
So I was a bit disappointed that there wasn't a village there, but no. So anyhow, rambling on, telling you that because my father was in the Royal Marines, this is where I was born, down here, so I was brought up here. The parade ground in the Royal Marine Barracks was my playground, because, and I used to listen to the Royal Marine Band, so I've always loved the Royal Marine Band ever since, because they used to rehearse just down the stairs at the back end of the parade ground, and you could always hear them. Learnt to swim out at Devil's Point, and went to school here, yes, and had my first job here working for the Western Morning News and Evening Herald in the photographic department, and then moved on to the newspaper, because my dad, during the war, had taken a small box brownie with him everywhere, and he'd taken photographs of what, in his case, was quite an interesting war all the way through it, because He was in the North Atlantic. He was part of the Malta convoys. He was on one of the ships that was really very important in sinking the Bismarck, which was the big German battleship at the time. And then towards the end of the war, after VE Day, his ship, the Newfoundland, was sent out to Japan to be part of the American Fifth Fleet. So my dad was actually in Japan when the bombs went off in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. And he was on board his ship when the Japanese surrendered to the Americans on the Fifth Fleet. Yeah. And he took photographs whenever he could, all the time. So I grew up looking at these, and I still have the albums in which the photographs are.
Heavens. Yeah.
Amazing pictures from 1945, 46, 47 of Japan and a few from China. Very extraordinary. All the little ones, you remember, some of you, the pictures were about this big. They're only tiny, tiny little things like this. But amazing images that he took of children in the street, of geishas, of no theatre, of all sorts of stuff he was taking photographs of. And I was so fascinated by this catalogue, this memory of the Second World War, that I grew up wanting to be a photographer. And so my dad gave me a camera when I was about 6, I think. And I've been taking pictures ever since, because my ambition was to be a photojournalist, which is why I went to the Western Morning News, worked in the photographic department, and then went to the Sunday Independent, which was where I served my apprenticeship, because I think we may have some media students in the audience here. We're talking, over 60 years ago now, and you didn't go to university to become a journalist. You were indentured to a newspaper and actually did an apprenticeship. I signed a 3-year agreement to be an apprentice, to learn my job on the job with the Sunday Independent, it was the Morning News and Evening Herald that I was in the photographic department. The Sunday Independent, the South Devon Times and the Tavistock Times were the 3 papers on which I worked as a trainee journalist. And in that time, had to learn shorthand and typing, because we didn't have little recorders that you have now. You had to take everything down in shorthand. And also do a degree in law. It was really important as a journalist that you understood libel and slander.
Yeah.
And politics, everything from understanding how politics worked from parish council level all the way through government up to the United Nations practically. So that was my 5-year apprenticeship, if you like, in journalism, to indulge my passion in photography, to become a photojournalist.
Just a quick one. I can just see that. How many people here have actually picked up a newspaper in the last month? Ooh,
well, quite a few.
That's
yeah.
not bad.
Not bad.
That's nearly 3/4 of the audience. Now, I would have thought, and I even work for a newspaper, I would have thought that industry was well and truly gone, but it's still hanging on.
Well, it is, and because of where I live in central London, I suppose I'm meeting journalists all the time who still work on newspapers.
Yeah.
But they will all tell you that everything that they have, the image that they have online, is what is really important. The Daily Mail, for instance, has a much, much bigger audience, a much bigger readership online than it has in paper. I think the same is true of the Telegraph. But the Mail, you see, is free, except that they've now started doing this really annoying thing called Mail Plus or something, where you have to pay if you want to see some of the things that they write, which is really annoying. You can get a lot of news online now, and a lot of news outlets actually do that now, which they didn't before.
Once you've waded through the adverts for Athlete's Foot, and whether Baby Spice has a third nipple, which I find actually some of it really offensive. You've got into a story and suddenly an advert comes up for the brand new car that
What,
you don't
online?
want. Yeah, everything's interrupted. Some of the websites are so complicated. Getting through it lasts longer than my first marriage, one of the stories I was trying to... sorry, I'm rambling myself now.
I should explain that David and I have known each other for a very, very long time. We are old mates, and so forgive us if we do start to ramble, but we'll try not to.
Yeah, just prod, get on with the next one. Actually, you say you started in newspapers. When did television beckon?
Again, it was one of those extraordinary things. I mean, I was writing for the Sunday Independent, and I was getting a byline for things that I was doing. So my name was appearing and my little photograph was appearing. I wrote the women's page for a while. I was the rugby correspondent of the paper for a while, which was wonderful because it was quite a small team. And of the men that were on the team, one was a cricket fanatic, one was the football correspondent, and the third one that was on the team wasn't interested in sport at all. But I, at the time, was going out with a man who eventually became my first husband, or my husband, Chris Dare, who played rugby. So I knew the rules because I'd stood on the touchline as a faithful girlfriend watching the game. So they made me the rugby correspondent, which was rather lovely. I had a whole year of it. It was great. Yeah, never did quite get in the bath with them after the game, but apart from that, it was a wonderful job to do for a year. But because I had my byline, and occasionally they would allow me to take my own photographs to indulge me as a photographer as well. And I literally just got a phone call one day. I was 2 years, 6 months into my 3-year contract with them. I got a phone call one day from the guy who was the program controller at BBC Southwest, based up in Seymour Road in Plymouth, where the BBC studios are. And he said, we've seen some of the stuff that you've written and we like it. Would you like to come up and see us and talk about possibly working for us? So I went and saw them. I did a bit of an audition in the studio. I remember they asked me to interview someone about Dartmoor Prison, whether it should be knocked down or was it a national monument. And fortunately, I knew enough about the history of the prison to be able to, literally on the hoof, ask some fairly sensible questions about it. So that was my audition. And they said, would you like to come and work for us? And which came completely out of the blue. But I still had 6 months to run on my apprenticeship. But I used to get Wednesdays off. So I did my very, very first job on September the 5th, 1966, which is 58 years ago. So I've been in television now 58 years, most of it for the BBC, not all of it. That was what I did for the next 6 months. Every Wednesday, when I had a day off, I made a film for the BBC. I went in the studio and I presented it. And at the end of the 6 months, they said I had a choice. My newspaper at that time had been taken over by the Daily Mirror Group, who owned all the little newspapers in the West Country. And they were running their own training scheme by then. And they offered me a job on what was then Fleetway magazines as a photojournalist. Tour the world, take my own photographs. The BBC offered me a job. And I thought, I've just done 3 years. I've now got my degree in journalism. I've got my degree in politics and my degree in law. I can always go back to newspapers. I may never get the chance of working in telly again. So I said yes, and as I say, the rest is history.
Can you remember your first wage bill?
Yes, I do.
This will shock you.
I do. I remember exactly how much I was paid because I kept the contract, which is how I know exactly the day on which I started, September the 5th. And to do a story about the salt ash oyster beds, I did a day's filming. I came back, I did my first bit of editing with a film editor, wrote the script for it, and then presented it on set, live, on Spotlight Southwest, as it was then. And I was paid £6.10. Or for those of you who are post-decimal, £6.50p was how much I earned for my very first television. But the interesting thing about it is, as I say, I never went to university, but I'm a visiting professor of journalism at Lincoln University. And when I talk to the students there, the ones who want to be broadcasters, I tell them that when I came home from that very first night, and I said to my parents, how was that? And I said to my dad, how was that, Daddy? And he said, it was all right, he said. But you did look a bit like a rabbit caught in the headlights, looking at the camera. And I said, well, but Daddy, I've been anonymous up until now. People may know my name from what I write in the papers, but they don't know who I am. They've never seen my face, really. And suddenly there I am appearing live in front of thousands of people in the West Country.
Yeah.
And I said, it's quite daunting, Dad. And my dad, Royal Marine, engineer, knew nothing about broadcasting. My dad said, well, when you go in next week, talk to me. So when you look at the camera, imagine that it's me and tell me the story. And I tell my students that I've been talking to my dad now for 58 years. Because when you think about it, I mean, I've subsequently done television programs like I presented the Eurovision Song Contest in 1976. There were 186 million people worldwide watching that. I've done royal events, royal weddings, the Queen's funeral, that have been watched by millions of people. I mean, really millions. Some of the television programs I've worked on, television news when I was doing it, was seen by 10 million people a night. I worked on a particular program that had 23 million people watching it. But you never see them because they're all at home. But you don't see a block of 10 million people because you will know that you watch television, maybe nowadays, you probably watch it just one of you at a time. Or if you're a family, you might watch, there might be two of you watching television together. But basically, you're never probably talking to more than 4 people at any one time in their own home. It's the same when you're doing radio. It's the old saying from my lips to God's ear, that there's nothing in between you. You don't see the people. And your audience is actually just a group of 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 people at home. So you are talking to one person at a time. And the great Terry Wogan on his Radio 2 program always used to refer to listener in the single, because he recognized that there were people listening in their cars at home doing the ironing or cooking in the office, in a factory, where he was talking individually to people. And I just feel that it was quite extraordinary that my dad, who had no background in broadcasting at all, just knew that was the key. Just talk to me, he said. And some of the things where I've been in quite frightening situations, nervous situations, important situations, I just always think, okay, Dad, this one's for you.
Lovely. That is lovely. You mentioned so many of your career there, or so many parts of your careers there. And I was watching, just as you walked in, Top Gear, which I had no idea you were one of the first, in fact, the first presenter?
I was the first presenter of Top Gear. It started off as a regional program out of Birmingham. And at the time, I was reading the news. I was doing a lot of motoring. I was still living in the West Country, so I was driving backwards and forwards to London at the start and finish of my shifts. I started as a news reporter in London before I started reading the news for them. And because I was doing a lot of driving, I was writing a column for the AA, and my husband, Chris Dare, was in the motoring trade. So I knew a bit about cars, and I liked driving cars, and I was clocking up, I suppose, about 36,000 miles a year, so I was doing quite a bit of driving. And the producer who was responsible for the show out of Birmingham knew this and said he wanted me to present the program, so I did. And so I did it as a regional program for a year, and then it became a national program. And I did it for 4 years, I think, before it came to an end, because I went to ITV, and in those days you could never work for the BBC and ITV. You were completely blackballed if you did. If you left the BBC, that was it. As far as they were concerned, you were dead in the water. And I had joined the consortium that had applied for the contract to start breakfast television in Britain, TVAM, and we won the contract. And so that was it. So I did, but. Up until then, for 4 years, I'd presented Top Gear, yes.
There's a wonderful bit of film online. I do suggest it. Just type it in tonight, especially with Tom Coyne, was that the gentleman that you used to co-present with?
There were lots of people. I didn't co-present with. We had men reporters that came in and did odd jobs and did stuff.
He did refer to you as the girl from the news. I thought, things have changed, thankfully. And you were driving a really smart Ford Capri.
Yes. Oh, I got to drive everything. I got to ride Harley Davidsons. I got to ride Pantechnicons. Before one spur of the M62, I think it is, around Manchester or Birmingham was open.
Yes.
One of those bits of motorway. Because they wanted me to drive, I was doing a story about tachometers, when they were first introduced, to work out how long lorry drivers were working for. they wanted me to drive a lorry with a trailer on the back of it. And the only way I could do it was if I could get on an unregistered road. And the only one in the country that was available at the time, because the Minister for Transport was going to open it a week later, was that long stretch of the M62. So I actually drove on the M62 before the Minister actually opened it. And that was where I drove the Pantechnicon. But I drove vintage cars, and we tested new cars as they came off the production line. I mean, we did a proper motoring program. It was not so we did things about pedestrians and motorcycles and all sorts of things. It was not a toys for the boys, which is what it became when Clarkson and co took it over and did it so brilliantly, but differently. Whenever I saw the guys, they always used to say to me, what do you think of our little program then, Ange? I used to say, well, it was different from the one that I did.
Did they ever invite you back?
Interestingly, yes, I did do a couple of things. I did do something for them that went out several years ago. But sadly, as we all know, Flintoff just had that serious accident, and so can't drive, and they stopped the program subsequently. But in the run-up to doing that series, I did a film with the three of them, where we drove around a circuit, and it was a race between the three presenters and three former presenters, and I was sat in the car with Flinty, and we went round the circuit that they always used to use, and we did a fabulous day's filming up there. But of course it's never seen the light of day, because after the terrible accident that he had, they cancelled the whole program. Yeah.
Television, fantastic. When there is a weakness or an issue, and I've seen so many careers suddenly change like that. When you think of the stunts and some of the programs that used to go out in the 60s and 70s when you were not insured, I met the Yorkshire television cameramen that were lowered onto the roof of what was left of Chernobyl.
Oh, yes.
No suits.
No.
Just sent down a wire and a helicopter just to film. Thankfully, things have changed.
Yes, but only relatively recently. I mean, when I was working on the holiday program, we were filming in South Africa, and I went cage diving with great white sharks, and there was no, we didn't have any sort of health and safety forms to fill out. And while I was there, they said, well, just hang on a couple more days, because they've started now to offer tourists the opportunity to rap down the front of Table Mountain. And rapping is what the Royal Marines and the SAS do when they come down face first. If you abseil, if you've ever abseiled, which fortunately I've abseiled, so I knew what I was doing. You face the cliff face that you're on with a harness on, and you sort of bounce down like that, off the face. But when you rap, you stand on the edge with your harness on like this, and you lean forward 90 degrees, and then run down the side like that. So they got me doing that. But again, there was no insurance for it. And the best part of it was, Table Mountain has got this, I mean, it's iconic. Everybody knows what the front of it looks like. It's got this flat bit like this, and then it goes in like that. And so they had a cameraman abseiling beside me with a camera that strapped to him, but one on his helmet. And they had a camera that was on the top watching me go down. But when I got to the bit where the overhang was, the cameraman who was abseiling then just went all the way down, and they said, hang on there, because we've got to get that crew and the one that's at the top all the way down to the bottom to see you arrive. So they left me hanging in midair on the end of this. I'm just swinging in midair like this, seeing Robben Island out there, you know, where
Nelson Mandela's
where Mandela was jailed, having a wonderful view of Cape Town. I was there about 20 minutes, seagulls flying underneath me. I mean, it was just extraordinary, just left me swinging. And then said, right, you can come down now, so that they got me when I landed. But no insurance.
No insurance.
And even because when I was in television news, of course, it was in the 70s. And we still had the troubles in Northern Ireland. And so when I was part of the reporting team, we all used to have to go to Northern Ireland, to Belfast, to the BBC offices in Belfast, on 10-day shifts, and we all did it on rotation. So we would be there for 10 days. And in the very early days, we didn't even wear flak jackets. And I can remember there was one occasion when we were in the Falls Road, and there'd been reports of children throwing stones at the car parks where people could park their cars hopefully without them having a bomb put underneath, in fairly secure positions. And then the police would go to try and stop them from doing that. But the snipers would be in the rooftops, and when the police turned up, they were being shot and killed. And there was an incident where this was happening, and we all went to report on it, and we didn't wear flak jackets or anything. And I remember being hit here like this. And for a moment I thought, oh my God, I've been shot, but it wasn't. I mean, it was a stone that had been thrown. But no, we didn't have insurance, and we didn't have flak jackets in those days either.
I must admit, every time I've been into a zone, they give you something bright blue with press written on it. Personally, no thank you.
As a target.
Exactly. Why not stick the big circle at the back of your head? It'd be far easier. So television, I mean, being in that studio.
Which one?
In the news booth, in the news studio.
In London.
In London. Yeah. Now, were you the first female newsreader?
I was the first. In a way, yes. Except, I mean, I'd done, bearing in mind, I'd done years, I did, I think, 3.5 years after I joined BBC Plymouth. And then I did nearly 4 years at Westwood Television after that, before I went up to London. So I'd been in telly a long time. And when I went to television news, there'd been a woman reporter there before me, but she hadn't lasted very long. And so I was sort of, the one woman in the newsroom with all the blokes. I started to, I was asked to read I was there as a reporter, and I was their sort of Northern Europe correspondent for a while, because during the oil crisis in the early 70s, I was working almost constantly out of Norway, Sweden and Denmark, because we were able to get oil from there. I mean, we're talking about something that was happening long before many of the students that are here were even born. So I was based there doing all those reports during that time. Interviewed Sheikh Yamani, the Middle Eastern minister who was in charge of the oil exports at that time. And I worked 3 months on the political programme on Westminster. So I did politics for 3 months. So starting the news was something that happened sort of almost by accident, that I was in the newsroom one day as a reporter, and the editor sort of sidled up and said, "We've got a problem, Ange. Richard Baker's going on holiday, and we've got a gap in the schedule because we didn't know he was going. Do you think would you mind reading the news for a couple of weeks?" And I mean, it started as casually as that. But because by then I'd been working in television for well over 10 years, I mean, it was not an alien atmosphere for me. And actually, out of all the things that I was doing, it was one of the easiest things to do was just to sit in the studio and read the auto cue, because, that was basically what the job was then. And I said, yeah, of course, yeah, that's all right, I'll do that. But it did sort of spark quite a lot of attention. And what I discovered was that back in the 60s, in the very early days of black and white television, when not a lot of people actually had televisions. If you remember when the Queen went for the Queen's coronation in the 1950s, 1953, I mean, a lot of people went out and bought a television to watch the coronation on the telly in black and white. And so in the late 1950s, early 1960s, there were not the massive millions of people owning and watching television that we take as the norm these days. And a lady called Nan Winton was asked to do what were not long news, sort of half-hour news programs that we have and have had now for a long time, but just the sort of the 5-minute bulletins at 6 o'clock and at 9 o'clock, and because they were just bulletins rather than long news programs. And Nan did it, I think it was barely 3 months. And the then programme controller of the BBC at the time said, no, women don't have the authority and the gravitas to be newsreaders, and so she was taken off. So when I did take over the 9 o'clock news, I was, yes, probably the first woman to read proper news programme newses. But I always think that, if somebody went before me and did it for however short a period, and however different the job was, that she should still get the credit for being the first one.
Yeah.
And so I always, I mean, the tabloid press always refer to me as the first woman newsreader, but I always like to say I was the first woman journalist newsreader, because Nan was not a journalist. She was, I think she'd been an actress when she was younger, but she had a lovely speaking voice, and she read the news very well. But no, it wasn't thought that women could do the job.
Was there a yeah, well, I was just about to ask that question. Sexism within the newsroom?
Oh, yes,
and those...
well, of course there was, of course. Yes, it was run by men, so of course it was, yes. But, I mean, it's not anymore. Not in the same way. Goodness, no.
Well, I mean, I remember my very first newsroom. It was thick with cigarette smoke, almost exclusively male, apart from the women who made the coffee or tidied up the papers.
And typed the scripts.
Yeah, that's it. Things have changed.
Yes, they have.
Good.
We now have a woman who controls the BBC, Charlotte Moore. Her deputy is a woman, Katie Phillips. We have... only because, I mean, and all the students and the people here involved in media will know that you don't have to be a brain surgeon to work out that women are just as intelligent as men, that women have got just the same brain power as men. We may look at things slightly differently, we may not. That's up for discussion. But we are all capable of doing so many of the same jobs, and in certain respects, I think there are women who may do the job even better than some of the men who do it. That may sound like heresy to some of the men, but it happens to be true. And there are women journalists and women broadcasters who are absolutely superb at their jobs. So of course, it only takes someone with half a brain to recognise this and to say, well, why would you not have women doing jobs if they are good at them? And they are. And I do think we went through a period where women were being appointed in that sort of that era in the late 70s, early 80s, where from America, our sisters there were saying, burn your bra, stand up for women's rights and all the rest of it. And I think, as often happens when pendulums swing, it went so far in the other direction that I think I can honestly say that some women were then perhaps appointed as just to tick the box and say, we've got a woman. In the same way that some of the men who had been doing the job before had got it because of the old boy network, because of family connections or whatever. There's always been, and you can look sideways if you like, but that's always been the case. So the pendulum perhaps swung just a bit the other way. But then it settled when people realized that you've got people like Lorna Kunzberg, who's very good at what she does. You've got people like Orla Gerling, who is very good at what she does. You've got wonderful women broadcasters who are so good at what they do. And not just in news and current affairs, but in sport. There's a girl called Gigi Salmon, who I think is one of the best of the tennis commentators, for instance. You've now got women. Why should they not be football and rugby commentators? We can understand the games just as well as the men can. And it's always been my feeling that the minute you got women into positions of authority of running television stations, of being in executive positions, where the old boy network and the old school thought among men that broadcasting was for blokes, and that's what you did. That when women took over some of those jobs, they thought, well, why can't women, be the presenter of a news program or a current affairs program, or be a political correspondent or a sports correspondent or an economics correspondent? If they can do the job. And I get into difficulty sometimes with some of my female colleagues because I always say that I actually think that that's the only thing that matters. Can you do the job? Do you know what you're talking about? Are you a good broadcaster? And if you tick all of those boxes, your gender should not matter. No. It should be whether or not you can do the job. And if you are if a woman is the best candidate for the job, let her do it. If the blokes are better candidates for the job, let them do it. But do not go in already saying, oh no, this is a job for the boys. Or, oh, well, we better have a woman, I suppose, just to keep the numbers off. No, just give the job to the person who can do it and the one who can do it the best. And that's why the best of the men journalists are still doing the job brilliantly. The best of the women journalists are doing the job brilliantly. And that really is how it should be.
Okay, let's just focus on the news for the moment. Is there one area, one story, one period that you really did enjoy reporting on? You were talking about the fuel crisis. That Yamani was about 79. I'm just trying to think, did you do anything on the Falklands conflict? Did you?
I was in America working for CBS television as their arts and entertainments correspondent during the Falklands, so was completely out of the country in that period.
Oh, right.
I was in America working, so no, I didn't do anything on the Falklands. I know that you are great friends with people who have been, so I was out during the miners' strike. I was out during lots of things that happened, and when I came back, I had to sort of learn about it all. But funnily enough, one of the most, I mean, it's not that there's been a particular era that I particularly enjoyed working on. I mean, I've always felt that because I've actually worked on so many different programs, and that's what I've loved doing. I mean, I've done quiz shows, I've done Come Dancing, which is light entertainment. I've done all sorts of different things. But in news and current affairs, I think the thing that I always found the most professionally and personally satisfying was knowing that when you were sitting in that desk in front of the camera, in front of the nation at 9 o'clock, which is what it was when I was doing it, for half an hour at night, that you were at the front end of the major stories, locally, nationally, and internationally, of the day, and you were telling people the news that they wanted and needed to know. And there is something very empowering about knowing that that is what you're doing. And I remember when 9/11 happened, and I was not involved in news at the time, I remember coming home, being glued to the television, being glued to Kirsty Young, who did it brilliantly for ITV, brilliantly, and wishing I could be in that seat and doing it. If you've sat in the seat when there have been major news stories happening all around you, you never, because I started in news, that's the foundation of everything that I've done, and you never ever lose that amazing buzz you get when there's a big news story. Excuse me, you just don't. You just want to be there on the front line with it. You want to be the person who's doing the interviews, who's telling people what the story is, who's giving them the information so that they know, is this important? What's going to happen next? What are the ramifications of this going to be? And the last time I did that at any peak was when I was not working for the BBC in television, but I was working for LBC Radio in radio. And for 3 years, I had my own program on LBC in the morning, which was Breakfast with Angela Rippon from 6 till 9. And I used to get up at 3:30 in the morning. I'd get, as they do now for the Today program, for instance. I'd get showered, get ready, go into the studio, be in the studio by 4:45. And at 5 o'clock, start putting the program together, and then I would be on the air for 3 hours. And it was a radio news and current affairs program, a bit like the Today program, but on commercial radio. And on one particular morning, I just got out of the shower at sort of about 3:30 or whatever, and I had the World Service on. And I heard the bulletin, and they said that the reader said that they were getting unconfirmed reports of a coup in Russia. And it was when Gorbachev was being overthrown.
Oh, right.
I've forgotten the date exactly now. It'll come back to me a bit later. But, and I thought, what? And we were a very small team on the program. There was the producer, there was me as co-producer and presenter. We had 2 reporters and an engineer, so there were 5 of us. So there was a very short chain of command between me and the producer, Steve Kite. So I rang Kite, sorry, I always refer to him as Kitey. I rang Steve at home and said, did you hear what I just heard? And he said, bloody hell, yes. I was in the car within about 10 minutes, dressed and in the car, in the studio, and we started ringing all of the people, because one of the great things that you do when you work in news, you have an address book full of amazing names and telephone numbers and contacts. So we started ringing all the English-speaking journalists that we had on our books in Russia, who worked for Pravda and Izvestia, just saying, what the hell is going on? And it emerged that, yes, there had been an overthrow of Gorbachev. And so we started putting together the people that we were going to be talking to on the program. Because of the time difference, because this was now 4 o'clock, 4:30 in the morning, America, of course, was still alive. So we were then talking to the senators that we knew in America, the people who were on the Foreign Affairs Committee, saying, do you know what's happening? Because clearly this was going to have amazing ramifications worldwide. And then at 5 o'clock, we started ringing the British politicians who worked on the Foreign Affairs Committee, saying, don't scream at us, but, they were probably still asleep. This is what's happening. Will you be on our program? And so we spent an hour and a half just backing up what the story was. And as I say, the chain of command was very narrow. It was from me to Steve, Steve to me. That was it. And our reporters were then left. They didn't have to go out and find stories anywhere. They were just in the office, keep bashing the phones. These are the numbers. These are the people you have to talk to. And I can't tell you how amazing it is to know that you are going to go on air at 6 o'clock with no script, but a list of people that you know you're going to talk to for a story that is going to wake the world up. And it's one of those moments where you are a proper broadcaster, because you have to make sure that your brain is in gear with your mouth, saying what it should be saying, that you have as much information about the political, economic ramifications of this story, the background to it, there's no time to go and research everything. Who is that man? What's the job? What's likely to happen next? Who is going to take over from them? What is the American response going to be? What is the British response going to be? You haven't got time to research that. You have to have been so on top of the news of the day that it's all stored away in that thing called the brain, the computer, and go on air, open your mouth at 6 o'clock and say, this is what is happening. This is what we hear is happening. The correspondents we've been talking to in Russia tell us that the tanks are on the street, that there are people in front of the White House in Moscow, that Gorbachev is at the moment at his dacha in the country. We do not know who is taking over from him, but we'll be talking to this one, that one, and that one. I'm going to be talking to whoever in America, and I'm going to be talking to the Minister of State for the Foreign Office in this country, and former ambassadors. So just knowing that you've got all that information, no time to prepare interviews, because there isn't time to do that. You just have to draw on all of your skills as a communicator, as a reporter, as an investigator, as someone who is on top of what is happening in the news at the moment, and hope, as I say, that your brain is in gear with your mouth, so that when you have an important person on the end of the line, you know the question to ask, you know the one to follow up, you know what you want to get out of them. And to be doing that for 3 hours was probably some of the most exciting broadcasting I have done. And what was very gratifying was knowing that while we were on the air, from 6 until 9, in those days, the Today programme went on at 6:30, not at 6 o'clock in the morning, which it does now. So again, we were ahead of the Today programme. And the Today programme, as I know it to my cost because I've worked for most of my life for the BBC, most programmes have quite a long chain of command and bureaucracy, and they did not even run the story until 7 because they wanted to make sure that everything that we were saying was actually true and was really happening. And then at 7 o'clock when they went on the air, they were asking us for the people that we had been talking to because they hadn't had time to set up everything they needed. And for 3 hours, I just flew. It was just amazing. And at the end of it, in those days, I would come off the air at 9 o'clock, and Michael Parkinson would take over from me from 9 until 12. He did 3 hours afterwards. And I remember Parky standing in the control room, whom I could see him through the glass. And we were batting around wonderful, wonderful stuff, getting ambassadors who'd been, the ambassador to Russia, the ambassador to America, all of them. These people were all on my program. And Parky was standing there with all the research notes that his researchers had taken from what we'd been doing, with a big grin on his face, and because he knew he was then going to take the story to the next stage. And I remember it was a commercial radio station, LBC, it still is, and I remember going, the final commercial station, there was Parky, just couldn't wait to get in the studio. And I just said, "Bugger off, Parky, it's my story." And he said, "Nope." And that was the only conversation we had. And at 9 o'clock, I floated out of the studio, and he walked in, and then he took on the next 3 hours. And we won quite a lot of awards for it, so it was amazing.
Excellent.
But it's when something like that happens. It's why I love doing particularly outside broadcasts, because you can't have a script for it. And the last one that I did, the biggest one that I've done lots of big royal outside broadcasts for American, Australian, and British television. And the last one that I did, the big one, was Her Majesty the Queen's funeral, which I did for Australian television.
Yeah.
Because I do a lot of the royal reporting for them. And it was extraordinary because the run-up to this was, I was lecturing on a cruise in the Mediterranean, and as we were coming into Cecavecchia, which is the port for Rome, my phone was buzzing, and it was my agent, whom we both know, Sue, saying, "Where are you?" And I said, "Well, we're just coming into Cecavecchia." "Where's that?" "Rome." "Right, get off the boat, the Queen's dying."
Sounds like
What?
that.
And I said, "What?" "Yes, the Queen has been taken seriously ill. We think the Queen is dying. You've got to get off the boat because you're on the air tomorrow morning for Australia." And I literally did get off the Cunard ship, the Queen Mary, I think it was driven to Rome, flew back, got back at 11, and 7 o'clock the next morning was on the air for Australian television because of the time difference, of course, and followed the story through all the week. It was just as it built and built and built, going through the lying in state, first of all in Scotland, then the lying in state in London, preparations for the funeral. And on the day of the funeral, because bearing in mind that I think at the last time they had a referendum on the monarchy, something like 43% of the nation said that they didn't want a monarchy. Australian television knew that Australia wanted to be there for the Queen at her funeral. And so we went on air at 2 a.m. in the morning from London, which I think was something like middle of the afternoon in Australia. And when I turned up, we were on a long, long gallery that had been built right outside Westminster Abbey. And we had the most amazing position because where we were standing with our cameras was right facing the side of the entrance into the Abbey, the famous West Door, where everybody went in for the funeral. And because we were starting at 2 o'clock in the morning, I was there at about 1 o'clock, and we went on air at 2. And there were no, this was a gallery full of television cameras and radio equipment for everyone that was coming later, but nobody was on air when we were on air. 2 o'clock in the morning. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, all the sniffer dogs came round. And while we were live on air, we were being sniffed in case we had any explosives or anything. So we made it. But it was wonderful because we gave everybody, we'd made films in the week beforehand, so we had lots of stuff to run. But it meant that I ended up being on air for 14 and a half hours. I think it's the longest outside broadcast I've ever done. And the most challenging part of it was most of it was very straightforward. You talk pictures. You just tell people what they need to know. You don't assume that they can't see for themselves and make up their own minds about what they want to see, particularly when the catafalque came down with the naval cadets and the naval crew pulling the gun carriage with the coffin on it and the crown and the orb and the scepter. You just have to give them highlights of what they're seeing because they can see for themselves what the pictures tell the story. But we followed all of that through until, of course, everything came to a close after the ceremony and everything came out of the Abbey. And then the gun carriage was pulled by the sailors up to the bottom of Park Lane, where it was transferred into the Royal Hearse. And it was then driven, not on the motorway from London to Windsor, which would have been the quick way. It was driven through all the suburbs from Kensington in London all the way through to Windsor. And at that moment, the Australians said, "It's over to you, Ange." And again, this was a moment when you hope that the brain will be in gear with your mouth.
Yes.
And that you can recognise, I mean, it was easy to recognise things like the Royal Albert Hall and the Albert Memorial, and I knew, fortunately because I know London, I knew the route. And they were driving through all the suburbs, which were lined with thousands of people, men with their children on their shoulders, people hanging out of windows, all the way on those urban roads, all the way out through to Windsor, and then at Windsor itself, going up the Long Walk. That extraordinary sort of military choreography. It's almost balletic, the way then that the soldiers marching in time and the sound of their boots on the gravel with that just the timing of it all the way through. And that's that extraordinary moment where I almost lost it. So it was an hour, just again, just not talking pictures, but just filling in when it was necessary. The most poignant moment came when we could see the cortege and the gentlemen at arms and everyone following, going up the long mile towards Windsor Castle. And the drone shot so high, seeing this, on the side, there were no people. They didn't allow the public into there. There was this black dot in the middle of the green, and we were all trying to work out what the heck it was. And suddenly we realized that the senior stableman, the horseman, was standing, was standing in the middle of that green sward, all the way leading up to the palace, with Emma, who was the Queen's favourite fell pony, standing to attention as the cortege went past, with one of Her Majesty's Hermès scarves just draped across the saddle, because Her Majesty never wore a helmet when she was riding. She always wore an Hermès scarf. And it was just one of the most moving moments. But I can't tell you if that's why I love working in news. It's what I was saying before about being a news reader. You're up the front. You're at the coal face. You are top of the pyramid, top of the iceberg, however you want to think of it. You are the person that is being seen, heard, listened to, with that amazing team behind you of researchers and producers and directors and technicians. But it's your voice, it's your face. To be in a position to be able to convey the importance of a meeting, the importance of a situation, the drama, the emotion of a moment, the privilege it is to be able to do that and describe what I could see and what was happening. And nobody knew Emma was there. There he was suddenly. There was the head stableman with her. And when I came off air at the end of that, after we'd gone through that wonderful ceremony in St. George's Chapel in Windsor, as I say, it meant I'd been on air for 14 and a half hours without a script at any moment.
Yeah.
Notes and a head. When you do an outside broadcast, you have a head full of 3,000 pieces of information because you don't know which 100 you're going to need. But you just hope that you pull out the piece of information that you need at the moment that you need it, and that you convey it in the right way. And the privilege of being able to do that, as I then did for the King's coronation, later again for Australia, as I've done for, I think, 5 royal weddings, all of those, in those moments when you cannot possibly have a script in front of you, you have to rely on your skill as a communicator, as a broadcaster, as someone who can remember facts and figures and deliver them in a way which hopefully will be entertaining, solemn, informative, dramatic, whatever is required by the atmosphere of the moment. The privilege of doing a job that enables me to do that is, I think, one of the things that gives me the greatest pleasure in the job that I do.
It's truly remarkable. 14 and a half hours. It beats my 5 hours on the arrest of O.J. Simpson on Sky News. About 5 hours on a man I'd never heard of.
Yeah.
But he spoke very highly of me. I just sat there, what am I doing? Makeup was running down the back of my shirt. I mean, it's a glamorous business.
Yes.
The studios are normally between 80 and 90 degrees. I did one audition for ITN where the air conditioning had broken and Mr. Purvis walked in and said...
Stuart Purvis.
Stuart said, this is inhumane. We're going to kill a presenter. We're not even broadcasting this.
We should explain he was the editor of the Music 10 at that
I should
time,
have
wasn't he?
explained, yes, about Stuart. But that was quite remarkable. Strangely, I was at Buckingham Palace yesterday for a garden party, and yes, she's gone, and the place does seem, I don't know, a little changed, a little quieter, a little colder.
No, I would disagree with you entirely.
Okay, well, you go there more. I'm only invited every 30 years. You're there on a regular basis?
Not quite, but
Not quite.
I've had the pleasure of meeting the King as Prince Charles on a number of occasions, all members of the royal family, in fact, and Camilla. Yes, the atmosphere is quite different and quite lovely.
Yeah. Well, maybe it was the rain yesterday, which...
It was pouring with rain, which was not very nice for you, was it?
Much as I love news, let's not criticise the weather. They didn't get that right on the forecast yesterday. Okay, let's just move to little lighter moments. You mentioned, not Strictly, but Come Dancing.
Yes.
That was, do you remember, what was the year?
Oh, it was late 70s, early 80s.
Remarkable programme, which gave birth to Strictly.
Yes, it did. And it was wonderful. And unlike Strictly, it kept changing the presenters. I did it for 3.5 years. And I was the 16th presenter, following in the wake of people like, Terry Wogan, of course, Judy Chalmers.
I'm trying to remember the Radio 2 presenter from Liverpool. He was wonderful.
Michael Aspel did it.
Michael Aspel did it, yeah.
I was number 16. And it was a programme that came, and there may be people in the audience who will remember having watched it. It came from Blackpool. It happened, I think it was on, from memory, for 6 weeks. This was late 70s, early 80s. And it was rather different. It was a wonderful dancing competition. It was a dancing competition in which, for amateur dancers, in which areas were pitted against each other. So you had the northeast against the southwest, the southeast against West Wales. You had Northern Ireland against the northeast or whatever. So they were teams, and the teams were made up of the young amateur Latin and ballroom and formation teams. And so they all performed and competed against each other. And so you would have two dancers, say one from Liverpool and one from Exeter, dancing the cha-cha-cha. Then you would have the couples dancing the waltz. Then they would do the foxtrot. So they were doing all of the classic ballroom and Latin dances. And then you had the formation teams. And at the end of it, all the points were totted up, and there was a winner from that night. And we went through all the heats, then to the quarterfinals, then the semi-finals, and then the final. And they were all held in Blackpool. And they were not live, they were recorded. We had a live orchestra. He was called Andy Ross. It was the Andy Ross Orchestra. But it was glamorous because, you know, the costumes were gorgeous. It ticked all the right boxes for I think it was a Friday night entertainment, in that it had live music, it had glamour, it had competition, it had a bit of sex, you know, because it was very sort of sexy, some of it, but it was competitive. And it was just a fabulous programme to work on. I absolutely loved it. And in those days, the BBC didn't just do Come Dancing. We covered the international competitions, the World Championships, the big British Championships down in Bournemouth, and the international competitions up in Blackpool. So I would do, I think 6 or 8 programmes for Come Dancing, and then probably about 4 other major dancing competitions that we covered for the BBC as well. So I had, nearly 4 years working on that, which was lovely. I loved it.
I remember. It's been on a few years to Strictly.
Yes.
Not as the presenter, but as...
A competitor.
Competitor was not... Well, you were brilliant. I've got to admit, this is the first time I've ever watched the programme. My wife and I sat there and said, Angela's on, and we all sat there, and the first time you came on, wow. And let's But you have lost so much weight since the programme. You were
During,
working out?
not since, during.
During?
Yeah, I lost a stone doing it, yes.
That workout was incredible.
Well, having been given the most fabulous partner in Kai Widrington,
Lovely bloke.
that was the start. That was wonderful. And when you have a whole week where you sort of get to know each other and find out what you can do and what you can't do. Then you have a whole week when you prepare for the first programme, which doesn't count, when nobody gets thrown out, as it were. And then after that, you are in for as long as you are voted in every week. So I did a total of 11, I managed to last until week 9, which was Blackpool. So I did a total of 11 weeks, 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. That was what the training was. And what you would do is, or what Kai and I did, we would go into the studio at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, and he said, right, the first dance we've got to do is the cha-cha-cha. So he did the choreography. He came with the choreography and said, this is what we're going to do, because we'd had a week where he had sort of a basic idea of what I might be able to do. This is what we're going to do. So he showed me the pattern of the choreography, which I kind of learned. I've fortunately got quite a good memory. And then we spent the rest of the 5 days, 6 hours a day, learning the technique, because, I had done classical ballet and tap until I was 16 and a half, I suppose, so I could move and I was still flexible. But you have to learn how to do a cha-cha-cha, which requires, certain technical things. You have to learn how to do the quick step. You have to learn how to do a foxtrot with the infamous heel turn. You have to learn how to do the rumba walk when you're learning a rumba. So it was 6 hours a day, having learnt the routine, then trying to learn the technique and perfect it to the point which by Friday you could do then at the technical runs and the dry runs, the technical rehearsals and the dress rehearsals, and then perform it live on the Saturday night. And if you managed to get through, then you had Sunday off. And I started to go to cryo treatments on a Sunday morning, which was going in an ice bath. Ooh. And I can honestly say that I never had a single twinge all the time I was doing it, because the cryo was absolutely brilliant, a wonderful way of sort of just making the blood rush to every part of your body and just keep you fit. And I was getting fitter and stronger all the time. And then I would have a lovely massage afterwards, which helped. So Sundays were the sort of day, and then go and do some shopping, get some food in the house to see you through for the rest of the week. Monday morning, start again. We did and what was funny was that Kai is only 28 and I'm 79. So there's 51 years between us. And many people in the audience will know that I performed with the famous Eric Morecambe and Ernie Wise and did a dance routine. Well, I did that in 1976, before Kai was born. So when Kai told his parents that he'd got me to dance with, he's got the old lady to dance with on the programme, his mum and dad said, well, you should watch Morecambe and Wise. So he knew there were certain things I could do. Mm. And when, on the very first day when we worked on the cha-cha-cha, he said, I know you can do a high kick. How high can you kick? So I said, well, up to about there, I suppose. All right, he said, so show me. So I did it. And then he said, do that again. And as I did it, he caught my foot. And he just kept pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing until it got level with my face. And he said, that'll do. And that was how we put the thing in the end. But then, having done that, the following week, I think the following week I had to do, oh God, yes, we had to do that awful waltz to The Sound of... No, it wasn't the following week we did The Sound of Music, where he was in those extraordinary trousers, shorts. I forget what we did, but the second week it was a different dance. So we had to start all over again on the Monday, learn it, get through the week, got voted through to the next. I thought I would probably be in the programme for about maybe, if I could manage, I didn't want to be thrown out the first one. Yep. I thought I could probably get to week 2, maybe week 3. We actually made it through to week 9. Then it was Christmas. And before that they said, would I do the tour? Which I then did, which I absolutely adored. We were on the road for 6 weeks in total. 1 week just rehearsing in London, a week rehearsing in Birmingham, and then touring 9 cities.
Yes.
So I thought I was probably going to be in Strictly Come Dancing maybe 3 weeks, 4 possibly, and it was 7 months in the end. But it was just, I loved it. I loved every minute of it. And I just had a ball.
As you said, approaching 80.
Yes, well, I'd be 80 in October, yeah.
And I remember the high kick on that comedy programme, Would I Lie to You? Yes, you did warn us at the Christmas party. It was brilliant. You made it over his, I can't remember the presenter's head. Can't remember his name, the Welsh comedian.
Yeah.
Over the top and down again. We were trying to get you to do it in the bar at Mary Tavy, or
Yes.
Tavy.
No.
Yeah, you refused to do that one, yeah. That was well, understandable. I was touring with Simon Weston, and we ended up at Morecambe, and I even sent you the photograph.
Yes, I
Your
know.
name is etched on the pavement around Eric's statue
Yes, it
there.
is, along with all the other people that appeared. The funniest one of all, of course, being Andre Previn.
Mr.
Andrew
Preview.
Preview and the boys in the band.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, just take me to it. It took me 15 years of knowing you to actually mention the Morecambe and Wise sketch. I don't know why I avoided it. You loved every minute of it?
I did. It was completely out of the blue. I was reading the news at the time. And maybe younger people in the audience won't appreciate the fact that Eric and Ern were not just absolutely, Eric Morecambe and Ernie Wise were at the top of their profession. They were, and I think still are, the funniest comedians that this country has ever produced. And their program, their Christmas program, was that moment when the nation sat down and watched it, which was easy because in those days there were only, I think it was 1976 I did it, there were only 3 stations. There was BBC One, BBC Two and ITV. I don't think Channel 4 was, or 5 were on the air then.
No, that was 82.
It was,
Came along,
yeah, so it was 1976. So everybody watched it at Christmas. And they had Glenda Jackson, who had done the funniest thing as Cleopatra with them. They'd had Elton John, who'd done stuff with them. I was just in the newsroom one day, and the phone rang, and it was a man called Ernest Maxim, who was their producer, who was a choreographer and a director. And I said, it's Ernest Maxim. He said, I'm Eric and Ern's producer. The boys would like, and I quote, the boys would like you to be in their Christmas show. What? Yeah, the boys would like you to be, doing what? Well, can you sing? Well, not unless you want me to clear the studio in 30 seconds. Oh, all right. Well, anyway, they'd like you to be in it. What do you think you might do? I said, well, I think I can probably dance a bit, because I did do ballet classes till I was about 16. I think I'm probably still, right, that's all right. Well, will you do it? And I said, well, I don't know, I'll have to go and ask the editor. So I put the phone down, trotted along on the 6th floor of Television Centre, went to see Alan Prothero, who was the editor at the time, and said, Alan, this guy called Ernie Maxim says he wants me to do the Morecambe and Wise Christmas show. Well, fortunately, Alan was a fan. I didn't tell him what I was going to do, because I didn't think he knew, and neither did I. And he said, yes, of course you can do it. So I turned up at rehearsal, having not met them before, and they said, well, we're going to do a dance routine with you. And that was it. And we had an hour's rehearsal, and they were just lovely, where we plotted the first part. Then we had the following week another hour's rehearsal to plot the second bit. Then we had a third hour when we put it all together. And then about 10 days before Christmas, we went in and recorded the program.
Simple as that?
Simple as that. And they were just lovely. They were 2 super guys. What you saw on telly was what you got. And the lovely thing about them, and it depends on whether or not, and of course we tried to keep it a secret, and unfortunately it got out beforehand that I was going to do it. So it wasn't quite the secret that we wanted it to be, because the whole point of the piece was that they got me behind a news desk, and they just went and it just said news flash. And from memory, I think I said, we've just had an announcement from number 11 Downing Street. The Chancellor says there may be trouble ahead, but while there's moonlight and music, and the desk opened, and I came out and did a dance with them. And depending on which document you read, they worked out how many people had watched the programme, and it's either 23 million or 26 million, depending on whether it's Radar or the other one,
right,
whoever they
yeah.
are. But more than 20 million people, which you just don't get nowadays because of the plethora of television stations that there are. But in those days, everybody watched the Christmas show for Morecambe and Wise, and it was somewhere between 23 and 26 million people that watched it. And it had quite a major impact, but they were lovely guys. And what was lovely about them was, bearing in mind that they were the top performers in the country, they made you feel that you were really doing them a favour by being in their programme. You really did. And they just were so lovely and so easy to work with. And actually they became very good friends, and I would meet them at functions, and then we started to have lunches together and dinners, and I got to know them and their wives really, really well. And funnily enough, Eric died in 1984, which is when I was in America, and I got a phone call. I was working for CBS at the time in the States, and I got a phone call from the Daily Mirror, and all they said was, we were just ringing to tell you, Angela, that Eric Morecambe's died. And I just burst into tears, I remember. I couldn't get a word out. I was so sad. And I came back, and then Ernie sort of worked on his own for a while, and then he died about 5 years later. Ernie's wife, Doreen, she sadly had a stroke, and I used to see her from time to time, but sadly she also died. And just 6 weeks ago,
Yes.
Eric Morecambe's wife, Joan, who was 97, she was the last of the four, she finally died. So they've all now gone. But my goodness, they were... What I find amazing is, and it's been happening, it still happens, I get people stopping me in the street saying all sorts of things, and then they'll say, got to ask you, what was it like to work with Eric and Anne? And it's that sort of vicarious link. There's a song, I danced with a man who danced with a girl who danced with the Prince of Wales. It's that sort of chain. And I worked with them, and those people who watched them when they were still alive, when the viewers were young watching them, it's their link to them still. They can ask me about what they were like, and I'm the closest now they're going to get to them, as are the others, like Penny and the others who performed with them. But what I find amazing is that the number of parents who say, my kids watch Eric and Ern on YouTube or TikTok, or we've got the videos or whatever, and young people that weren't even born when Eric died in 1984. Kids of 10 and 12, 15, 20 now, all younger generations have watched them and find them funny.
Oh, yeah.
Because they were never unkind, they were never crude, they never took the mickey out of other people, they were just funny and made you laugh. And it's a kind of humour that is timeless. And people will still watch. Even though when you think, we're talking about the late 1970s, early 1980s, you're talking about 40 years ago. Their humour has never changed. And generations that have come after have found them just as funny as we all did when we saw them for the first time round. And Andre Previn, I'd interviewed him several times, and so knew him a little bit. And he was not just a great conductor and composer and classical guy, he was a brilliant jazz pianist. And he came to the Barbican in London to do a jazz concert. And I went to see him afterwards, and we kind of got round to talking about Eric and Ern, as you usually do. And I remember him saying, bearing in mind, this was Andre Previn, who was then the conductor of the Royal Philharmonic. And they were the boys in the band in that classic bit that he did with them. And I would try to do that. I can't, because he had the most wonderful, laconic New York accent. He said, Angela, I have won Oscars, I've won Grammys, I've won Emmys. I've conducted the greatest orchestras in the world. I've performed with the greatest artists in the world. And every time I come to London and get in the back of a black cab, the driver says, "Hello, Mr. Preview, how are you and the boys in the band?" And he sort of wore it as a badge of honor, in spite of the Oscars and the Emmys and the Grammys.
Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I know, say, you and I have a friend in Simon Weston who was
Yes.
the Falklands veteran. He was 50% very badly burnt in the war, entered the BBC one day to do a short interview, ended up, it was 8 hours he was there because he got kidnapped by Eric and they took him to the bar afterwards, they showed him and got him into the studio audience. He loved them, absolutely.
They were
loved
wonderful.
them.
They were genuine people.
And Joan, I'm part of the comedy, British Comedy Society. We put the blue plaques up in London to people who made us laugh, not the soldiers and sailors and statesmen. We thought we'd do comedians. Joan came along and she gave me one of Eric's paper bags. Do you remember that? Hey, throwing this.
Yes.
I never learned how to do it, but I keep the bag. The bag's in a book being pressed at home.
I tell you what Doreen gave me, and I still have it. They topped the bill at the London Palladium forever. And on their door, they had a brass plaque which said, Ernie Wise and Eric Morecambe, and the year, London Palladium and the year. And they had taken the plaque off when they left and mounted it on a piece of board, a piece of oak. And she gave it to me, and I've still got it.
And the wonderful thing about you, you didn't even know your name was on the pavement at Morecambe.
No, I didn't.
I photographed it and sent it to her, and Simon, he's pointing the finger.
Yes.
Bizarre day out. Listen, we've gone on for an hour and 20 minutes.
Oh, I talk too much. I'm
no,
sorry.
you don't,
Yes.
because you've done so much. Let's just can I just focus on one thing? Every year, either us or both of us, we host the Dementia Conference, which comes from Plymouth to the world, the International Dementia Conference. Dementia means an awful lot to both of us, and I know both our mothers had it to the end of their lives. What does it mean to you standing there, listening, talking, and passing on information to people who want to share their experiences?
Let me take you back to 2004 when my mother was diagnosed, so 20 years ago. She was diagnosed. I knew diddly about dementia. I admit that. I didn't. But as a journalist, I started to research it, obviously, to know a bit better and a bit more about what was likely to happen to my mum and how I was going to help her. And I became an ambassador for the Alzheimer's Society because they gave me a lot of information and were really very, very useful in those early days. And so I did a lot of interviews, and I was doing one with the women's editor of the Daily Mail, who halfway about dementia, that my mum had it and talking about it. And in those days, 20 years ago, there was a huge stigma associated with dementia. People didn't talk about it. Many families were in denial if they had a family member that had it and wouldn't get them diagnosed. It was not talked about in public. And there I was, being very open about what the condition was, how it affected my mum and how it affected me. And at one point in the interview, the woman's editor of the Daily Mail said to me, "Aren't you embarrassed to be talking about this?" Ooh. And I said, "Well, people aren't embarrassed when they talk about cancer or Parkinson's anymore, so why?" And she said, "Well, it's a mental disorder, isn't it?" And I said, "No, mental health is a very serious subject, and there are many people who suffer from all sorts of aspects of mental health. But dementia is a disease of the brain, rather like cancer eats away at parts of your body. Dementia kills the cells in your brain and kills them off. They die. It is a disease of the brain." But I realized from what she said the magnitude of the stigma. I realized the lack of information and knowledge about and of dementia. And I became an ambassador for them and then started to give lectures and interviews and make documentaries and do all sorts about it. Because I met so many people who have been diagnosed with dementia and live with it and have subsequently died of it, some of them. I met so many of their carers, of their loved ones, of their families who were affected by it. And over the past 20 years, I've spent quite a lot of my life talking about it, lecturing about it, advocating for changes in attitude, not just from the public, but from the medical profession as well towards it, and passing on as much of my own personal experience as I can to friends and family who say, Ange, my mum's just been diagnosed, what can I expect? Passing on what I learnt as much as I can, and seeing over the years, through things like Dementia Friends, which we set up in 2012 under the auspices of the then Prime Minister. We didn't set up Dementia Friends then, sorry. Dementia Friendly Communities in 2012 under the auspices of the then Prime Minister David Cameron, who made dementia the most important part of his time in Number 10 in terms of the medical things that he was interested in pursuing. And in that time, through Dementia Friends, Dementia Communities, I've seen more and more people understand what dementia is, what it actually physically does to your brain, what effect it has on people, how they can change in character, how they can become aggressive, agoraphobic, their complete character can change. Yes, they forget what happened yesterday, but remember what happened 30 years ago, how it affects families, and the number of people in the early stages of dementia who said to me, people walk on the other side of the street now because they don't quite know how to talk to me. I've lost friends, my world has shrunk. All of those things made me feel that if I can be an ambassador along with dozens of others that work for the Alzheimer's Society, dozens of other people who now talk openly about it, and change opinion and change the way that the public and the medical profession look at and think about dementia, and therefore improve the lives of people with dementia so that they can live well with the disease, then it's something that I have done very, very willingly and feel is important.
Well, I won't say half the battle won, but it's certainly a few steps towards.
Oh my goodness, when you think we've got 2 actors who've won Oscars for portraying people with dementia in major Hollywood films. We've had soap operas. I think Hollyoaks and The Archers dealt with dementia, from the people who had it and dealing with the people who were dealing with it, how it affected families, loved ones, wives, husbands, friends, everybody. We've had plays written about it. We have radio plays written about it. Books have been written about it. And the number of people with dementia who have now, during their lives, written about what it means to them, passing on that knowledge, that personal experience of it, all the time, chipping away at the stigma, chipping away at the fear that people have at it, persuading more and more people to be diagnosed, getting more and more money for research, so that there are some quite exciting things that are happening in research now in terms of the diagnosis. We had the National Conference of the Alzheimer's Society just last week, and we were being told about the blood biomarkers that now, one of the scientists who was talking to us was saying, we now have a device which can detect not only if you have dementia, but which dementia you have, because there's more than one of them. There's dementia is the umbrella name. There's Lewy bodies, there's frontal lobe, there's vascular, there's Alzheimer's. They are all dementias. There are dozens of them. We can not only tell if you have it, we can tell what you have from a biomarker in your blood. And it is so precise. It is the equivalent of me saying, take a grain of salt, drop it in an Olympic-sized swimming pool, and we will find the grain of salt. That is how accurate now the blood biomarker machines are. So it's going to be, one of the problems has been people haven't always been diagnosed early enough, and so the condition has worsened over a period of time when they could have been part of a medical trial, when they could have been perhaps already taking Aricept or some of the drugs that are available for people with dementia. We can now diagnose within days and weeks rather than months and years. And all of these things have happened in the last 20 years. And as with so many things, when things start to change, the rate of change accelerates. Yeah. And while it was quite slow to start with, it is now accelerating quite rapidly. And there is all sorts of information out there now about dementia. And if I've been a tiny part of that, I just feel that when I look back to how ignorant I was of what was going to happen to my mum and what was the effect it was going to have on me, compared to the way that now there is so much more information, so much more help socially and medically. Carers are still not looked after as well as they should be. Yes. Carers are not supported as well as they should be. That's the next battle. But if we can all be some part of that, then we will have made had a major effect on the lives of an awful lot of people. And I think that's just, it's having a social conscience, I suppose, and that's something that I'm very happy to do.
Having to say goodbye twice as well to your loved ones, and each society has a different approach to the issue.
Yes.
1 million, possibly, in people who have dementia in this country.
I think there are more.
On the rise. Yes.
I think there are more.
I think
because
so.
there are so many that are never diagnosed.
No.
But it's getting better.
It is. Ladies and gentlemen, would you please put your hands together? Angela Rippon, CBE.